Out of all the software that I use, there is nothing that comes even remotely close to how productive I am when I use the Linux command line. It's just so flexible and there's so much you can do with it that it makes you wonder, how did I ever live without it? Maybe you're new to Linux, or maybe you saw somebody using Linux in a video somewhere, and if you had absolutely no idea what they were doing, that's okay. You're in the right place because this video is for you. I'm showing you how to use the Linux command line. Okay, so I'm using Arch Linux for this example, but the Linux command line is pretty much universal, and for any distribution you're using, these commands will be the same. Okay, cool, so let's get started. So what is the Linux command line? Well, really, it just allows you to access the Linux kernel itself. In other words, pretty much anything that you can do with a computer, you're able to do here. Anything from navigating files, opening programs, editing files, pretty much anything you name it. As long as you have the program for it, you can do it. The first command I want to show you is called pwd. So pwd stands for print working directory, which basically just tells you where you are in the system at this moment. If we press enter here, you'll see that we're at /home/Alfredo. Now these things here, home and Alfredo, can be thought of folders. If you come from a Windows background or a Mac background, this might be more familiar to you like folders. So this, for example, the home is an actual home folder or a home directory, and the same thing with Alfredo. In Linux, every single user has their own folder, which can be thought of like a profile or an account on the computer. Now I want to show you CD. With CD, we could change directories, which is like navigating through different folders on a Windows or a Mac machine. For example, I have a directory here that I can show you. If we go into CD, Documents, Projects, and then Linux command line, which is a directory that I set up beforehand, one thing to know is that you might have noticed that I did that really quickly, and that's because I'm using tab. In the Linux command line, tab autocompletes things. So for example, if we go back to your line, all I did was press LI and then tab, and that completed the rest of the folder. And again, we can verify that by using the same command we did before, pwd. If we press enter on that, it now shows us a different thing here. As we can see, we have home, Alfredo, Documents, Projects, Linux command line. This is where we are now in the file system. So again, you could think of this as Finder or Explorer. It's just a way of navigating around different files, right? So for example, in a basic thing that we do a lot with file explorers is make folders, right? Or make directories. So on Linux, we could make a new directory using the command mkdir, which stands for make directory. Pretty self-explanatory. So here as an example, let's make a folder here of a month. So let's call this June. So now we made that. One thing to note here is that if you saw, nothing really happened between when I pressed enter and that, we just got a new line to enter input. If for example, I made a mistake here and I did something like mkdir, forgetting the I, and did the same thing here, as you see, we get an error now. It says command not found. And this is convention across the board. If something doesn't make sense here, if you put something that doesn't make sense or something doesn't work, you will get an error. Now let's continue here. I want to show you the command ls. ls is used to list the contents of a directory. So if for example we go here and we type in ls followed by enter, as you can see, that folder that we just created, June, is now in there, right? As you can see that's in there. Now what if we want to make another one? So let's do mkdir April here, for example. If we do that and now type ls again, as you can see, now we have two directories, right? We have the April and June because we just created those right now. In fact, if we want to make more than one directory, we could actually do it all in here. So for example, let's make one called February, one called March, and let's do an October one, like that. If we do that and we press enter and then follow that by the ls, as you can see, now we have even more folders that we just made. Now, one thing to know is that these commands, like for example, ls, are not just limited to ls themselves. They have something called arguments or options. For example, for ls, we can use the arguments a, for example, and that lists all the folders. Now, as you can see, we have all these folders that we've made before, and now we actually have two more. This is because the -a flag or the -a option shows us all the folders, even the hidden ones. So in this example, what is dot and what is dot? Well, dot simply means the directory before it, and dot means the current directory, and that will make more sense to you in a bit. I'll show you. Another example is that ls also has a flag called la, which you can press, and as you can see, it gives you even more information than before. Now, as you can see, we've kind of hit here the end of the command line, right? We're kind of at the bottom here, and this is fine. You could literally keep typing things as much as you want, and they'll just keep scrolling. But there might be times where you get to a point where it's just kind of crowded, like things are just messy, and for that we have the clear command. So the clear command, like it sounds, literally just clears the screen. So we type in clear and enter, and now we have a new thing. Now it didn't delete anything, everything's still there the way it's supposed to be, but now we just have more room, which could be very convenient. So for example, if we press ls again, we still have everything as there as before. Now let's move into one of these folders here that we've created. We can move to the April folder, for example. Again, the way we do that is using cd for change directory, and let's go into April. So we're here, right? Now we type in ls, as you notice, we don't really have anything, it's empty, basically, because as we can see, there's nothing in here. So let's make a file. Now to create a file, the way you do that is use the touch command, like that, and then followed by the name of the file you want to make. So let's say I'm working on a Python program, and I want to make a file called program.py, like that. I just go ahead and hit enter on that. And if we use ls now, like this, followed by enter, we see that we now have a file here, which is that program.py file which is made. Now touch by default makes an empty file. So if we were actually to look at the contents of this file, it'll be empty. Now again, like folders, we can make as many as we want. So let's call this second program.py, like this. And we hit enter on that, and then ls again. So we can see now we have two files, right? The one we created before, and then what we just created now. Now, if you want to go ahead, maybe for whatever reason, remove one of these files, let's say I made some changes here, and I want to actually remove program.py because I no longer need it, we use rm. Rm is used to either remove files or directories. The way we use that is using rm followed by what we want to delete. So for example, in this case, we could delete program.py, again, using tab to autocomplete. That way we save ourselves the keystrokes. Now, one thing to note here, and this is important, unless your Linux system is set up in such a way where whenever you delete something, it goes to a trash bin, which is definitely not a default configuration of the command line. Once you hit delete on this, there's a really good chance that you won't be able to get it back. That's just by design the way it is. Some people say that Linux doesn't forgive. So if you delete a file, be careful because it's probably gonna be gone. When I first started using Linux, there's been times where I was doing something and I don't know, I was typing, but for whatever reason, I deleted something and it was an important file, so I had to go back and recreate the whole thing, which is very painful. So just keep that in mind before you press enter. So again, now in this case, since I know there's nothing in here that I really care about, I'm gonna go ahead and press enter here. And if we ls again in its directory, we'll see that that program.py file we had before is now gone, so we just have this one here now. Now, like I said before, rm can be used not only to delete files, but also directories, right? So if we go back a directory here like we had before, over here, if we go back a directory, we could actually maybe try to delete one of these directories here. So, but first we have to go back, right? Because right now if we do pwd, as you can see, we're actually in Linux command line and then inside the April folder, but I want to be here. So how do we go back? Well, like I said before, change directory allows you to go to a path of a file, right? So if we wanted to, we could do something like this. cd /home /Alfredo /documents /projects /Linux command line here, and then /APR, which is the April folder here. And if we do that and ls now, you can see we're back in the same directory, right? But what we want to do is we're going to go back one. So a quick trick here is that if you press up on the Linux command line, it actually goes back into your history like you typed before. So if we go up one, you could actually see I just typed ls and it went back up. And if we go up one more, we're back here, we just typed it. This is super useful if you're doing something repetitively, so you don't have to keep typing things all over the time. You can just go back up in your history, and you can keep going up as much as you want in your history, right? Or back down to go back through your history. So let's go back here to this here, and we want to go to the Linux command line folder. So I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna go ahead and press enter on that. Now we're back here, and if I ls, we can see all these folders, right? Like before. Now we were just in this April folder, which contains second program.py. And what I want to do is I actually want to go ahead and remove this folder completely. So again, rm can be used to remove files or directories. So if I use rm APR, you'll notice something here. Once I press enter, it gives me some kind of error here. And it says rm cannot remove APR, it's a directory. So again, I told you remove can be used to remove directories or files. But in this case, again, in order to do this, you have to use one of those flags or arguments we were talking about before earlier. For rm, the flag to use is called -r. So that's rm -r, and then the directory you want to delete, in this case, April, right? Now, -r here actually means recursive. So if you've done any programming at all, you might be familiar with recursive functions. Basically, all that's happening here is that when you use the -r flag, everything inside the APR folder is being deleted, and also the APR folder will be deleted. So it's a recursive function. So if we do that and press enter, as you can see, this time we actually had no errors. And if we ls here, like before, Now we actually don't have April anymore. Now we just have February, June, March, and October, which is cool. That's exactly what we wanted to do, right? We wanted to delete it. Now, let me show you something else. If we, for example, now go into February and press enter on that, we're now in the February folder. And we could see that because here it says February, but also we could see it by using the pwd command, which tells us now we're inside the Linux command line and it's on February. That's where we want to be. Let me make a few files here. Now, instead of actually using touch like this and making a file like this, for example, 1.py like that. And now if we ls, we can actually see we have a file in there. Instead of doing that, we could actually be a little smarter about that and actually do like we did before with the make directory command and make a few files here. So 2.py, 3.py, 4.py, and let's make one more, 5.py. If we enter that, right, and then ls and that, now we have all those files that we just made. There's multiple ways of doing this, and this is what's so cool about the Linux command line. This is one way of doing it, but you could even do functions within here, which I won't get into right now. But you could do like a function here that tells it to generate a file with the extension .py and a number from 1 to 100 and make 100 files that super quickly. So it's really cool. But what I want to show you here is what if we want to actually go ahead and delete every single one of these files? Well, we could use the rm command, right? We could use rm1.py like that. And if we ls that, we see that now we don't have 1 anymore. We have 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we keep doing that for the rest of the files. But if you have 100 files, like we talked about before, I don't want to sit here and do that 100 times. Maybe you do. I don't want to do that. So what we could actually do is use a wildcard. And if you're familiar with programming at all, a wildcard pretty much just tells something to take care of everything. So to make more sense here, if we do rm and then star is a character for a wildcard. This is telling it to remove everything. So again, be very careful, because if you're doing this in a directory you're working with and you delete it, it's gonna be very hard for you to get it back. Obviously it's possible, right? You go through different software and everything to I guess recreate the file and stuff like that, but you don't want to do that. It's a pain. Just I've been there and it's not pretty. Anyways, in this case, I'm gonna go ahead and remove it. Now, one thing to know is that unless you specify the directory you want to go ahead and remove things from, remove always works within the current directory. So in this case, when we do remove everything, only the stuff inside the February folder that we're currently in will get deleted. Nothing else outside of it. So if we do ls here, as you can see, we have nothing in here. But if now we go back to the directory before, and instead of doing what we did before, that I showed you before, where we did cd and then we went all the way back to the path, there's an easier way of doing that, which if you remember before, when we used la-a, we had two other folders here. We have dot and dot. Dot means the current directory. So in other words, if I were to cd dot, that means just go into the current directory, which we're already in. That's no point in doing that, right? If ls, we're still in the same directory. There's no changing that. But if instead we use dot, that means go back a directory. So instead of doing this thing again, all over again, where we have to put a long command line, we could actually just do cd dot. If you see that, now we're back here. We could use pwd if you wanted to here to show us where we're at, like that, and we're now in this folder again. And if I ls here, we're back here, right? Now again, right now we're just messing around with this February folder. But for example, let's say we actually want to use another command, which is the cp command. The cp command can be used to copy files. Now, like before, we could copy a file from one directory to a different directory, just like you would expect in a normal command line system. But like before, we could actually use the asterisk, in other words, that star operator here, the wildcard operator, to tell it to do everything as well. So for example, let me go into the February folder here, right? And let me make a few files here. Let me make two of them. Let's do 1.txt and 2.txt. It's just text files, right? Like that. We have two files now. Let's say we want to copy 1.txt to the June folder, right? Now, currently, we're inside this directory because of pwd. You can see we're inside the February directory. Now, if we want to put something inside this June directory, what we want to do is we actually want to go back one directory before this one and then into the June folder. So if you keeping that in mind, what we can do here is doing this. What we can do here is do this. For example, we use cp. Cp again is for copy. We copy a file here. For example, we're going to do 1.txt and we want to go back one directory and then one into the June directory like that. So what we're doing here is we're telling it, hey, copy 1.txt back one directory, which is in the Linux command line, and then into the June folder. So if we do that here, we press enter, As you can see, we have no errors, which is a good thing. It tells us that we did the right thing. If we ls here, you see we have 1.txt here and 2.txt. And now we want to see what's inside this June folder. So instead of going back all the way to maybe the previous one and then to the June folder and then lsing, we could use ls straight from here. ls // and then inside the June folder, we press enter on that. So this is listing the files within June, and inside the June folder we have 1.txt, which is awesome, exactly what we wanted to. But now, what if we want to copy everything? Again, we could do copy 1.txt into that, and then copy 2.txt into that, but that's a lot of work. What we could do again is use that wildcard operator like this, copy everything into, for example, this case, let's move it into March. So if I do that, no errors, which is good. ls, as you can see, we have these files still here, but we should have a copy of them within March. So let's ls back and then March. As you can see, there you go. We have the same output. So we have 1.txt and 2.txt. Now let me show you the move command. The move command can be used like this. So as you would expect for that, we can move files around. So now let's move 1.txt here. Let's see what we have in here again. So inside the February folder, we have 1.txt. So let's actually move 1.txt into the October folder. So for that, we'll do move // and we'll put October like that. So you can see here, something I didn't notice that I did is I actually never gave it a file. Obviously, if we don't give it a file to move, it doesn't know what to move, right? So we'll do move 1.txt into October like that, into // October. There we go. And now we ls into that. You see that we no longer have 1.txt because we moved it, right? We moved that to a different one. So when you move a file, it's like copying it and pasting it and then deleting the previous one, or it's just cutting it out of here. So we literally move the file. So if we ls now into that October folder, as you can see, 1.txt is actually in there. So that's how you move files. And with that, this very long video concludes the Linux command line. Now these are basic commands, right? These are basic Linux command lines that I've shown you. There's so much more. Like, we've barely scraped the surface of what you could possibly do with it. You could combine commands using things called pipes. There's so much you can do. But before you go, I want to show you something really cool. Now, obviously, this is a lot of information, right? And the reason I know this is information is because I drilled it over to my head so many times, using it over and over and over and over. But as a beginner and someone who's learning it, what do you do when you don't remember what these commands do? You come back to the video, right? And you watch it again. Obviously, not practical. I need the views, but it's not practical, right? So what do? Well, it's conventional for these commands to actually have a guide to tell you what to do, right? Because even if I know a lot of this stuff, I don't know every single command and what every single command does. So that's why we have the help feature. Now, conventionally, the way you access that is using the command you want to use followed by the -h flag or the -help like this. So this just tells you, hey, what is, like, it's a guide, right? It tells you, help me out with this. What do you do? What are your features? So for example, let's look at ls again, right? If for ls, if we use -h, you'll notice that nothing really happens, right? It's just printing out the current directory, the ls in the current directory, and the h is not really a function. By default, it just prints that out. But if we use ls -help, as you can see, we get a bunch of output here that tells us a bunch of information about it. Here, as you can see, the help flag display this help and exit. So it shows us a bunch of information about it. So for example, earlier we used the -a flag right here. As you can see, this is all. So it tells you exactly what that does. It says do not ignore entries starting with a dot. Basically, this just means everything. It shows you everything, even hidden folders. That's what this does. And again, it has so much more information, right? There's so much more things you could do with it. And this is what I mean when I say it's so flexible, because there's so many things you can do with it. And as long as you remember these, and again, even if you don't, you could just come back here and look at them again. But there's so much functionality here that you could actually use, right? You could even do reverse here, recursive. There's so much stuff you could do here. So that's what that does. So like I said before, it's either -h or -help. Some commands actually have both of them. You could either do -h or -help, whatever works for it. But if one doesn't work, usually the other one does. Now, another thing I'm going to show you is that even though this is a lot of information, really good, usually the help parameter doesn't tell you a lot of information other than maybe the things that are common to do. So that you'll see that there. And usually this is enough. But in the case of a program that has a lot more features that you might want to access, there's actually something called man. So man stands for manual, and like any other manual, it shows you how to use something. So if we use man and do ls, so you can see here, this window pops up here, which you can quit. Down here, you can see you can quit by pressing Q here. So if you go down here, you can see there's so much more information here, and usually it's a lot more information that is given at the help menu. You see here, we have a lot more information here. So basically you go through this thing here and you can find even more information. So this is what you do when you don't know how to do something and you don't remember how to do something. You just look at the help menu or the manual. So again, to quit that, we just press Q here, and that gets us back to our command line. And now the very last thing that I want to show you here before I let you go is that these things, these commands that we have been using, like ls or cd or all these different commands that we've been using, are actually programs themselves, meaning they're programs like any other program. And the way we have been using this program so far is literally by just using their name. And this applies across the board to any program. For example, if I want to go ahead and open Firefox here, right? All I have to do is type in the name of the program on the command line, and I press enter on that, and Firefox opens up just like you would expect. Nothing crazy there, right? It's just like that. And this works across the board. Again, GIMP, for example, is a program on Linux, or just actually, I'm pretty sure it's on Windows and Mac as well. It is. And I misspelled that. Like this, GIMP is just a program used for image manipulation. So like editing images. If I press that and hit enter, GIMP should open right up like it is right now. You see that? And this is useful to know, right? Maybe you like coding and you use VS Code. I have Paris Code here. Code should open back up. There you go. So this is across the board. It works for any program because all these commands that we're using are actually programs themselves. That's why it's so flexible, because you could actually, within the command line, a lot of times you could combine the outputs and inputs of different programs. And maybe that's something I'll get into later if you're interested in watching that. But yeah, there's so much you could do with it. It's just so flexible. And of course, like any other program, for example, if we do Firefox here, like we said before, with the command line, there's actually a help feature, and that is conventional. So that pretty much applies to any program within the Linux ecosystem. So if we do H here, as you can see, there's even options for Firefox itself, right? And these are things that you would usually do within the program itself, within Firefox. So for example, here, if we go down, you can see here that there's the option for a private window, right? So when you open a private window, you usually go into the program itself, into Firefox, and then you either press a shortcut or you make a new private window through the menus. What's so flexible about this is that, like, again, with a lot of programs, you have control over the underlying stuff. So again, it's super flexible because you can do things like this. So for example, I don't even have to open the Firefox program directly to go into private window. I could just, you see that here, that this is the flag for a private window, and use Firefox -- private. One thing to note here is that there is no autocomplete, and the reason behind that is because this is not a directory, right? So it doesn't really know what I'm trying to do. So you have to go ahead and make sure you put it right. So that's private window here, and if I press enter on that, there we go. We have a private window. I don't even have to open Firefox directly to go to the private window. I did it all from here. All right, guys, that's it from this video. Hopefully, from what I saw, this is a really long video, so hopefully you learned a lot, and hopefully now you're more confident to like actually use Linux, because again, the command line is so powerful, and it's one of those things that once you start using it, you really realize how amazing it is in the terms of flexibility. And I could do pretty much anything that I could do with my GUI buttons, clicking around stuff, with my command line a lot faster and a lot more efficiently. And if anything else, if you really don't care about the efficiency, you should just look cool doing it. I mean, come on, look at this thing.